Greetings. This is Michael Chan with the Faith and Firearms Project, and we have today an anonymous interview with a pastor who has graciously agreed to talk about his own view of firearms and his own and the intersections of faith and firearms. So, thank you very much for agreeing to participate.
Well, thank you, Dr. Chan.
I'm just going to begin with a couple of sort of basic questions about your own understanding of Christianity. And for someone like you, I think it will be a little bit basic, but I'd appreciate the responses. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and if you're comfortable, maybe just the general region in which you are, the general region in the nation in which you are.
Yeah, sure. I am a Lutheran pastor in the Midwest, and I grew up Christian. I grew up in a different tradition, but I came to Lutheranism a bit later to life, and so that's my denominational background. A lot of people. In Midwest, Lutheranism is not really a common. Some parts of the Midwest, Lutheranism is not a common thing. So people always ask me, what do Lutherans believe? And I usually tend to focus on what we have in common with, the rest of the body of Christ. So I always give them two words. What do Lutherans believe? I always tell them Jesus Christ, and just go from there.
Yeah, and insofar as you're comfortable saying it, what were some of the denominations with which you were affiliated earlier?
There was, my early experiences were primarily fundamentalism, which was Baptist, Pentecostal type roots, and I had a number of family members who were involved in that, and so that's where I found myself as a kid.
Yeah, and how do you what does it mean for you to be a Christian? How is that significant for you? What does it mean?
Well, it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. I was really influenced by the Finnish school of Lutheran theology. They talked about this union between the soul of the believer and Jesus Christ, and that really spoke to me. And another major component is the sacraments. I believe in the external word, and so the sacramental nature of the church is something that drew me into that relationship with Christ in very powerful ways, and that sacramental aspect is something that was not a part of my background at all. So I found it to be very surprising that the Holy Spirit drew me into the Christian faith, in a deeper way, through the means of grace in that way.
I see. Okay, thank you. And then when you think about God in your own mind, what are some of the things that for you?
I think that primarily I think in terms of the incarnation. There's the miracle of God made flesh. And it's really it's something that I always took for granted. Growing up. But if you really think about it, it's not intuitive. It's not something that we would come up with, and it's really profound on many levels. So I think in terms of the incarnation, who if we want to know who God is, we look to Jesus Christ, and although it is confusing, there's to me, I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of parts of the Bible where God is killing a lot of people, and so I mean, what does that say about God? And I don't want to gloss over that, but I can say with confidence that because of Jesus Christ, I can say that God is love. There's also a mysterious, part of God that I don't understand. I mean, yes, I believe that God is love. At the same time, I don't believe that that's all that God is. And so, but when I want to know who God is, I look to Jesus Christ, and I have confidence that as a member of the Trinity, Jesus Christ represents God. So I think without Jesus Christ, I don't know if I would have that, or I don't see how I would have that connection. So I think it's that relationship with Christ and with the Holy Spirit that is really, sustained me in that relationship. I believe that, God is merciful, God is just. I believe I've been heavily influenced by liberation theologies. I believe that God is on the side of the oppressed. And that's something that really gives me a lot of hope. It raises a lot of, injustice itself raises a lot of faith questions. But at the same time, that's a central component, of the Bible, is that God frees us from death. God frees us from sin. I believe that God is also working to free us from the political realities that crush people. And so I think, the liberation theology has really helped me to see, the political side of Christianity. And I know there's a lot of people who will say, oh, you shouldn't mix, religion and politics. I don't see how we can't. I believe that they're really, look at Mary's song, Magnificat, and that's a very political statement. So I think that, learning how to connect my faith with politics, and with this idea of God's preferential option for the poor, that's been a huge paradigm shift for me in my adult life. And a lot of that came out of my theological training once I went to seminaries.
Yeah, well, you really just connected in some interesting ways, theology and politics. I mean, you did that explicitly, and that kind of leads us into our conversation about guns. And I'll probably ask you this question in a couple different ways, but I'll start by just saying, are there certain aspects of the theology that you just related that you think influence your view on guns, maybe some aspects of that theology more than others?
I wrestle with it. I was thinking about this last night. There's a lot of reasons to have guns, just because there's a lot of different, gun types. And I think this is something that a lot of folks who have never experienced firearms just don't understand. A hunting rifle that holds 4 rounds is a lot different from a semi-auto handgun that holds 17. And so there's a lot of different reasons, or in the early days, I used to do a lot of hunting. So I acquired a firearms collection over time. It just kind of built up, in pieces. It was never like one, decision to really get into it. I think in terms of my faith, I think a lot of people would see me having guns, for self-defense as a lack of faith. Like we should just, trust in God. And I've read some really profound, pacifist theologians. John Howard Yoder, I think, was probably, the most influential one. So in terms of faith, I have wrestled with pacifism. Is that the only viable ethical position for a Christian? I don't think it is. I really respect the pacifists. I think we need them. I think we desperately need their voice in the conversation as a counterpoint. They make us think. And I wish I could, go for that option. But I can't at this point in my life. I think a lot of that is just, I have been a victim of violent assault myself in my life, which profoundly affected me. I know that God doesn't protect you from that. I mean, I don't believe that God protects us from evil. I believe that God can protect us from becoming evil ourselves. And so and I don't want to dismiss that. I think that's a really profound thing. I do believe I have a responsibility to protect not only myself but my family and my friends in any way that I can. And I believe that there are actually very few, real pacifists out there. There are, one of the things I've always heard is, you always do the "what would you do," scenario. Well, what would you do if somebody came to your house and started, beating up and raping your wife? Well, I would call the cops. I'm like, okay, well, you're simply using another human being as a weapon. You're
Oh,
just,
I see what you're saying.
yeah, you're not willing to pick up the weapon yourself, but you will use another human being as a weapon while sometimes subtly denouncing that human being for doing so. And so that's part of the position that I really have not, I can't understand at this point. And I also don't believe that God's will for us is just to allow ourselves to be victimized by violence. At the same time, though, anybody who engages in violence, they almost always believe that they're doing the right thing. They always believe that their cause is just in some way. And so, and I think that's why it takes a lot of careful ethical reflection. I mean, owning a firearms is a huge responsibility. And I think that, my inclinations, towards gun control, which I actually do support a lot of the gun control measures that are on the table, is just the knowledge that there's a lot of people who don't take that responsibility seriously, or who see that responsibility much differently.
What's so fascinating about this conversation is how the whole question of divine agency has come up. In other words, how does God actually act in the world? And you brought that up kind of at the beginning of the conversation when you said that you don't, the God, how did you say it? That God may not protect us from the evils that we'll experience in the world, but maybe God can protect us from becoming evil. Within that, I kind of hear a certain way of thinking about how God actually acts in the world. Is that, or am I misunderstanding you?
No, I think you are. I think that's a real crucial part of it. I mean, I don't consider myself a deist, where God interacts with the world, and there God creates the world and then steps back and kind of watches it go on. I don't believe that, although I do think that I flirt with it at times when it seems like, when you experience when I see tragedy. Sometimes I do. I saw I was called in on a case where there was a murdered 9-month-old, and that was really heartbreaking for me. It was a thing that was it's something that really affected me in a deep way. And of course, I mean theodicy, the question of why do we experience evil and stuff. I mean, I think that's the most difficult question we have to answer. And I would say that I don't have any real hard and clear answers on that, and neither should I. I think, if I do have some really hard and clear answers on that, I think it can be insulting to the victims. It can be insulting to people who have experienced tragedy, and it's going to ring very hollow. I mean, I don't think that. Well, I mean, I guess whenever I think of eschatology, I see all the evils in the world. I see U.S. has been engaged in open-ended war for over a decade now, and you just read history and you're thinking, well, why doesn't Jesus just come back? I think they called it the delayed parousia in theology, and I think that really the delayed parousia is more difficult for me to get my mind around than a theodicy.
We should pause there and say, just for the audience members who maybe aren't initiated, in theological jargon, you're referring to the fact that Christ has not returned.
Yes.
Christ's second coming this is part of the Christian teaching of Christ's second coming.
Yes, Christ's second coming. Yes, where we have were the last things, are initiated. At the same time, though, as a sacramental Christian, in some ways, Christ never left. I mean, Jesus Christ. I receive Jesus Christ, body and blood, every single Sunday in a concrete, embodied form, and so we're not left completely, totally abandoned. But it is. To be honest, this is something that I've studied quite a bit. And I can't say that I really have any really good answers yet.
Yeah, I do appreciate your openness with some of these things that you're struggling with, and it's just amazing how many theological topics are weaving their way into this conversation about guns. I mean, it's a fascinating conversation so far. Um, let's go back to biography a little bit. Tell me just a little bit about, give us a brief history of your history with guns.
I grew up, learning to shoot. It was always something that was, really enjoyable to me. And then, my friends had guns, and it was just a part of the culture. It was, I know there are some people where that, this is an alien experience. It's just something that I've always been comfortable with. We learned to break them down, clean them. And it was really, in a lot of ways, it was just something to do with your friends. And I know a lot of the parents out there are just horrified, by hearing that. But we were okay. We know what to do. Nobody, we would never go out and shoot anybody who was, you know, acting inappropriately. And I really, I enjoyed learning new skills. It was, it was really a good time, with my friends, and it was a good time with my family. It was a hobby, and I enjoyed that was back when ammo was more affordable. So we'd go out in the country, and I could shoot, had a 22 caliber pistol. I would shoot 500 rounds in a day. And there was a lot of days in which I would just shoot 500 rounds, and that's all I would do was just shoot all day. We'd have steel targets. We'd bring cans. We would shoot at sticks, and those are actually some of my best childhood memories. Were shooting with my friends, and I know there's a lot of people who see, they hear the word gun, or they see a gun and they think violence. That's not the first connotation for me. I mean, yes, a gun can be used. A gun is, and I guess, that's the reason why it's such a big deal, and that's why we have to have a critical, discussion about it. But I mean, that's not what the culture was geared towards. It really was a shared fellowship aspect. And we got into hunting. We got into we'd hunt a lot of deer and hogs, and we would and actually I didn't have to buy meat for years, which was
Wow.
really nice. And it was the first time I'd ever had meat that had never been frozen, that had zero, at Walmart they always pump it up with those preservatives and that little saline solution. This was the best meat that I'd ever had in my life, and I didn't have to pay for it. And there was also the camaraderie. It was, with hunting, you'd have the adventure, you'd have, the stories, coming back. But for me, it was primarily a culinary thing. That's actually how I got into cooking, was through hunting.
Oh,
Because,
so you enjoy cooking as well.
oh yes, very much so. I learned how to cook wild game. Um, Although I don't do it anymore. I'm actually um, almost a vegetarian now at this point in my life, for a number of reasons. But yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. We'd cook wild turkeys. We made breakfast sausage with the hogs and the deer. We could cook tacos. We'd cook a deer roast. We would have steaks, and that was amazing. But actually, the firearm was just a tool in that. And then there's also, another, I also do have some handguns, which are primarily for self-defense. And then I went through another level of training for that as well.
Can you tell me this? You started off with guns as kind of a recreational tool, to use your language, and also as a way of acquiring food. When did the shift to thinking about guns as a self-defensive self-defense tool come about in your own life?
I had some death threats by family members. There was some family members who in and out of prison with some major drugs who got into it with another family member, and it was really bad situation, and there was some physical assault involved in that squabble, and I'm not going to go into the details of that, but it was traumatic, and so yeah, I think it was my own experience of being exposed to personal violence on a very up close, intimate level, where there was a fear of death from people who have killed before, and that was very scary for me, and I wanted to be prepared for those kind of situations if they were ever to come up again.
It certainly would be a terrifying experience to have. Um, Give me a second. You mentioned that you've had some training in handguns in particular. Are you able to describe some of that training?
Yes, you can take combat pistol courses. I've also been trained by military members of the military. Just shooting at a target is I mean, it's good to learn the basics, but in terms of an actual self-defense scenario, you have to have other skills that moving, shooting behind cover, concealing behind cover, shooting with your offhand in case you are injured, and also shooting moving targets. Those are primarily the more of the self-defense skills that a person is going to need, because when it happens so quickly, and it's such a dynamic, fluid situation. You have to be able to move, shoot, hide, and acquire moving targets all at the same time, and that takes some practice. There's also skills to enter a room safely. They call it slicing the pie, and learn how to approach a physical environment in a systematic way for maximum safety. Other skills involve a flashlight. If you're in a dark environment, how are you going to use your pistol and a flashlight together in a competent and effective way?
So you have had a significant amount of training. It sounds like self-defense training. You mentioned earlier that you are in favor of some level of gun control. Do you think that all people who have or carry a pistol should have that kind of training?
I wrestle with it, though. I mean, and this is just the same reason I wrestle with guns. There's a lot of people out there who have guns who will use them, who will never pull it, nobody will ever see it. It's there if they need it, but they will never need it. But then there's some people out there who seek it out for another purpose, and any those skills that you learn, they can be used for self-defense, but it also could make you more effective in some other ways. And so I would say, yes, I wish all responsible people had that level of training, but not everybody who seeks out that level of training is responsible with it. And I think a majority, most gun owners are fine. But what we're seeing now in the modern era, I think this is the reason why gun control, discussions have popped up, is because, all it takes is one person, with the proper tools, who can inflict a lot of damage. And I think, we had Columbine. I think that was the major, first school shooting. It wasn't the first school shooting, but it was a scale I don't think that we had seen before. And we have I remember we had a mass shooting in Luby's, Texas. I remember there was a postal shooting in Edmond, Oklahoma. That's where we got the phrase "going postal," and it is in some ways I think it's too much power for one person to have. On the other hand, the genie is already out of the bottle. We can have, gun control, and I don't think this is an excuse not to do it. I think we should do it, but not have. I just don't expect it to be very effective. You know, we've already let the genie out of the bottle. There are so many guns out there that if somebody was intent on doing a lot of damage, it would be very easy for them to get a hold of it. It's much easier than people realize to acquire a firearm. With private to private sales, you can. I've actually I'm actually part of some Facebook sites. You can set up a deal on Facebook. You can meet in the parking lot of Walmart. You can make the transfer, and it's completely and totally legal, just like that. And so I do wish anybody who does have firearms, I would hope that they would be well trained on it for safety reasons. In terms of combat pistol, combat shotgun, combat rifle courses, I don't know. I think that people will enter into those courses for a variety of reasons, but I don't. But on the other hand, I think restricting those kind of classes is not going to make that much of a difference, because the people who are perpetrating these crimes have been able to do a massive level of damage without it. I mean, those Columbine boys, they would just go out in the country and shoot up stuff. They would shoot bowling pins in the wilderness of Colorado. I was thinking of Cho, the Virginia Tech shooter. All he did was his firearms training was shooting into targets at the range, and he was able to inflict a massive amount of damage, primarily by chaining the doors, and people couldn't get away. That was the reason why that death count was so high, is because he pre-planned it very carefully. He chained the doors beforehand, and then then he launched his rampage. And I will say, I believe that a majority of gun owners are responsible, good people. I mean, all the ones I've known have been. At the same time, the potential for the technology being misused has some really grave consequences. And this is why I really differ with the NRA. They see any talk of gun control as a violation of the First Amendment, and they're very dismissive of people usually using paranoid scare tactics. But I think that even though the folks on the left who are advocating for gun control don't know much about guns, I do understand that they have really good reasons to be concerned, and I think that needs to be listened to. I may not agree with a lot of their policy proposals. A lot of times they tend to focus on the cosmetics of the gun rather than the function. And so I think that maybe having some people who are more knowledgeable about guns involved in the construction of that kind of legislation would be helpful. But it is very hard to get through the paranoia on the right. I mean, you hear so many times Obama's gonna take your guns. Obama, they want to create a national registry, and then the registry is going to lead to confiscation. The Obama administration hasn't done anything. I mean, they have. There was some efforts after Sandy Hook, but the response was so overwhelming that it never went anywhere, and that really disturbs me, because there was 20 or 21 dead kids in that classroom, and if 20 dead children doesn't get us to at least say we need to have a conversation about this. I may not agree with you or what you say or the policy proposals. If that doesn't get us to have a national conversation, I just don't see what will.
Yeah. So what, Pastor, what do guns then represent to you?
That's interesting. I think that
Stay with it for a minute if you need to. That's all right.
I think, when I think of guns, I think I'm both comforted and disturbed by them at the same time. it's a simultaneous reaction. I mean, yes, I do feel safer with my gun. It's something that I know how to use. I know how to defend myself and my family. But also, there's other people out there with the same technology. So it's not just a source of safety. It's also a profound source of danger as well. And so I think that it really is a mixed bag, and I think as I become an adult and I've reflected upon this more, as a kid, like when I saw a gun, I just saw fun. I mean, it was just like, a lot of kids grew up playing video games. We grew up, playing with guns. And so it was fun for me. But I think as an adult, and as I've wrestled with the ethical, moral, spiritual implications of gun ownership and just guns in general, I think I have a much more sober view of firearms, and it's become more sober over time, and it's becoming more sober now.
Your own view is becoming more sober.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, since we're on the topic of ethics, let me ask this question. There may be some Christians or other people who might look at you as a pastor and as part of a religion who's at the heart of which I think is love for the neighbor and concern for the neighbor. How does your view of guns as protective tools fit into that kind of paradigm of Christianity as a love for the neighbor?
I mean, well, sometimes I think there are certain situations in limited circumstances where there is risk for for people's lives, that using a gun is love for neighbor. It is the most loving thing that you can do in those circumstances. If we could have had somebody with a gun, in one of these mass shootings who could have intervened, I think it would have been that's something that we would probably see as something that was a responsible decision to make. So I do think that I don't think that having guns is in any way against this love for neighbor. I think that if we love our neighbors, we should be able to protect our neighbors. And really, if things really degenerate in America, I don't want I don't want the militia groups to be the only people who are armed. And because politics can change very quickly. I mean, right now, yes, we enjoy protections from police. We have our society is becoming more unstable and fragmented, but we still have relative peace through governmental protection. But government can't protect you all the time. And it's not guaranteed. I read Lord of the Flies, William Golding. Society is only 9 meals away from meltdown. People don't eat for 72 hours. You've got a completely different political situation on your hands. And so I do think that there are some situations in which using a gun can be a loving thing. And I think that I think there are some situations in which pacifism is extremely irresponsible.
In which pacifism is irresponsible. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't make that out exactly. So then the final question is, what do you think that people who maybe are not firearms enthusiasts or who don't share your views on guns, what do you think they misunderstand about you?
Well, there's a lot of sloganeering. I think it's really hard to have a nuanced discussion, because you get, kind of the NRA crowd, they get entrenched in these positions. I have better conversations with gun control advocates than I do with folks who are on the firearms, the pro firearms side.
So you would say that maybe an NRA member might misunderstand you more than somebody who maybe is opposed to the NRA's policies. Did I hear you correctly, or?
Yes, yes,
Hold on.
that's exactly right. I get more flack from people on the right, who I have had conversations with this about. The it seems like the reactions are just so knee jerk. You're dismissed as a liberal, or you're stupid, or you've been brainwashed by Obama. Although I did enjoy my free Obama phone, which was nice. They also gave me a shot of gin for voting for him. It is difficult to have um, conversations with that. I guess my frustration with the left, the advocates, even though I would consider myself a gun control advocate at this point in my life. My views have evolved on that. I mean, there are some people who are just opposed to any gun of all type. Nobody should have guns. I don't support that. I mean, my hunting rifle held 4 rounds. That's a type of firearm that has not been used in crimes. It's just a different kind of technology. And, so I think that to be opposed to all firearms is not really realistic. I think there are certain types of firearms that are problematic. There are certain types of firearms where their only purpose is interpersonal violence. Whether that, and it's usually said, okay, well, I need that for self-defense. Well, somebody can also use that for a more, offensive purpose. And but overall, my conversations with gun control advocates, actually, I've once they know that I'm willing to listen, and I'll actually concede some points to them and say, okay, I can see where you're coming from, and I think you're right. I'm going to rethink about this. And I found that opens up the conversation. I have not been able to have those conversations with people on the right with that kind of response. Because with the advocates, once they see some kind of openness, some kind of willingness to dialogue, where I'm actually vulnerable, willing to change my views, then they're able to kind of listen to, or they'll actually start to tap my experience and actually ask me for my opinion, instead of me just trying to argue about it. It is very difficult to have these conversations right now because there is so much polarization in our political discourse in general. And I think that the NRA has become more extreme. I mean, now they've got Ted Nugent as one of their spokespeople, who is extremely irresponsible. I don't think that we should really be listening to Ted Nugent in any other way except for the radio. I liked Cat Scratch Fever, but I don't really care about his opinion on politics anymore. And
for those who don't know, Ted Nugent is an NRA board member and also a musician, a rock and roll musician.
Yeah, he was big in the 70s and 80s. Now he's this big, pro Second Amendment advocate. But a lot. I think a lot of the difficulty in having a conversation is just that the paranoia has been ramped up so much, over the years. There are some people out there who their purpose for having firearms is not just hunting or recreation or self-defense. It's actually insurrection. They believe that the government is going to come in and wage war upon them, and they have their slogans, Ruby Ridge, all of that. And they have their own mythology around kind of these end times where they have to valiantly and heroically fight against the federal government. So the federal government is their enemy, and that actually scares me. That branch of gun owners, that actually scares me, and I think it's irresponsible. And when they band together like that, they actually become a political force. And I think they're kept in check now, because we have a powerful federal government. We have FBI, things like that. At the same time, if we have any kind of disintegration in our political structure, those groups go on the move. And there's a lot more of them out there than what people realize. and or maybe I've just been exposed to a lot of them. I have been exposed to a lot of them in my cultural context, and they really scare me in a lot of ways. And so, but their political narrative is one of insurrection, and I don't understand, how they don't understand that as treason. I mean, yes, I don't trust government to do the right thing all the time. At the same time, government has been instituted by God for certain purposes, and I think a a government that doesn't function perfectly is better than no government at all. And so I guess I look at government like I look at church. The church is reformed and always reforming, and so our efforts is to try to engage in the political process, and try and participate in democracy that way, rather than withdrawing from the process and preparing, through military training to actually bring it down. So at this point, I would have to say I have a lot more in common with the left and gun control advocates than I do with the folks I've been talking to on the right.
Pastor, thank you so much for this conversation. There's just a lot of fascinating stuff to explore. Do you have any final comments that you want to make?
I would just like to say I really appreciate this project. I think that there's been there's been a real vacuum in terms of the dialogue. Because we've got polarized sides engaging in polemics, and this is actually, I think, a chance to hear some more nuanced voices that are and some non-nuanced voices. I want to hear all the voices, but I think it is a really good opportunity to engage in some dialogue, and I think it's absolutely essential, because we've got some major problems that we're dealing with. For me, it was Sandy Hook. Sandy Hook, I believe, was a real turning point for me, and it still breaks my heart to think about, what those kids went through, what those teachers went through. So I was really disappointed that a national conversation didn't move forward. But that doesn't mean that I don't believe that a national conversation is possible.
So, Pastor, we've had throughout this conversation a kind of philosophical or theological undercurrent has been there, and that has to do with the question of anthropology, which, not the discipline, but the question of what does it mean to be human, and what kind of world do we as humans live in? And I feel like there's been kind of an implicit anthropology or some anthropological statements made from you, and I wonder if you'd just be willing to fill out how the way that you think about humanity informs your understanding of guns.
Yes, and I think that brings us to directly to a conversation about sin. What does it mean to be a sinful human being? We are violent creatures because of our alienation from God. And when I read Scripture, you've got the fall in Genesis, and then just a couple of pages later, Cain kills Abel, and that kind of violence is a direct result of our own alienated condition. I think a lot about the Lutheran phrase simul justus et peccator. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, that's just fine. And will you just explain it to us, though?
It means that we're justified and we're sinners at the same time, and it means that grace does not abolish nature. We are justified, we are saved. At the same time, we live in a sinful world, in sinful systems, and that's what leads to the proliferation of violence that we have. I think of Reinhold Niebuhr, who said that sin is the only empirically provable Christian doctrine. And I think he's right. If you look at the History Channel, it's basically the Hitler Channel. It's all about us killing each other. It's the history of humans killing other human beings. And unfortunately, when we look at history, as the technology has grown, it becomes more massive in scale. You
Oh,
know,
you
we
mean the human ability to do damage increases?
Yes, very much so. And I think this is one of the reasons why science is a double-edged sword. I mean, science, brought us a cure for polio, and I'm very thankful for that. At the same time, science also brought us, the atom bomb. I mean, the folks at Hiroshima never saw that coming, and that kind of weapon. So I mean, so I mean, just looking at the progression of human technology, we're talking about guns, which is our current technology. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, to think that we might be killed by a weapon that hasn't even been invented yet. And so yeah, as the technology grows, our capacity for doing damage grows. I mean, we invented. I mean, Civil War was the first mechanized war. We invented the Gatling gun. It was invented by a guy. Dr. Gatling, who he wanted to create a weapon that was so horrifying, and the carnage would just be so intense that we would never fight war again. Well, that's not how it turned out. We had formations they weren't used to fighting. The tactics had not caught up to the technology. We even see that in World War I with the trench warfare. The tactics had not caught up with the technology at that point. And so, I mean, just if we think about just in terms of guns or any kind of human technological capacity to inflict damage on one another, it's obvious that we can't handle it. Human beings cannot handle this responsibly. If we've had enough time to work it out, and if we were going to do it, I think we would have done it by now. And so, I remember when my brother was in college, he was studying science. And he actually found out I would actually have to check this quote. I need to. I'm going to look this up after the interview. He said that something like 40% of scientists are employed by the weapons industry.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if that actual percentage is true, but there is actually a lot of scientists who do work for the weapons industry. And I think that's one of the problems now with the war on terror is there's a lot of money to be made in this kind of technology, and they have lobbyists, they have political influences, and when war is profitable, you're going to see a whole lot more of it. And so there's also the economic side of that. But all of these systems, the economics, the politics, the technology, all of this is a part of sin. I don't see sin purely in individualistic terms. I see sin in systemic terms. I mean, systems can be sinful too because human beings are sinful. I mean, I think, growing up in the culture that I grew up, I mean, sin was usually, some kind of individualistic moral lapse. Oh, you got drunk, it usually has something to do with sex, or something like that. And I'm not discounting that. I think we do need to think morally and ethically about these things. At the same time, I think we need to expand the focus. What does it mean to be sinful human beings individually, and what does it mean to be a part of a sinful collective? Because mob violence is always worse than. The mob feeds off each other. Especially when there's anonymity involved. I mean, that's why the KKK wears masks. You get a bunch of masked people together who are intent on committing violence. They're capable of doing horrific things, and I think that when we look at our recent history, warfare, it corrodes our souls, and I'm not, which brings, we have Augustine's, just war theory, which is a whole, set of ethical parameters in which, need to be met in order for a war to be considered ethical or just. I don't know if it's possible for us to actually follow those. Because we rationalize things, we self-justify things, and also, like I've worked with a lot of folks who have been in combat. It creates moral injuries within people, and
Killing or combat does.
Which, can you say that again, Dr. Chan?
Yeah, killing and combat create moral injuries. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. Yes, even if a person does it under the right conditions, Um, I've talked to some guys who have killed, who were a part of a unit in Iraq, and they went into it after 9/11 thinking that they were fighting this kind of war. Then they were diverted into Iraq. They were these, and that's why it's important not to stereotype combat troops. They're not all gung-ho or brainwashed. There's a lot of them who are extremely intelligent people who've thought about these things critically, who were opposed to the war. Oh, they were opposed to a war that they were fighting in, but they killed because they had a responsibility to their units. They had a responsibility to the guys next to them. They had a responsibility to get back home to their families. But the experiences were extremely traumatic for them. And I think that killing in a war that is morally ambiguous might have different psychological and spiritual consequences than fighting in a war that's much more, our cause is much more clear cut. I think, okay, World War II, the Nazis, they just gassed 6 million Jews. They've gassed 4 million people of other races, gay, lesbian folks. Okay, that's a pretty clear moral imperative to go in there and fight. I would sign up for that one in a heartbeat if I was able to. But we get this open-ended war on terror, which means that the war is not defined, the geography is not defined, the parameters for victory are not defined. And I remember it was Sun Tzu who said there's no advantage in prolonging war.
You're talking about the art of war.
Yes, the art of war. There's no advantage in prolonging war. Actually, Sun Tzu, I believe, is very misunderstood. A lot of people see him as a warmonger. Sun Tzu said it's better to take a state intact than it is to destroy it. So, I actually have a much different reading from Sun Tzu. In a really ironic way, any leanings towards pacifism that I have come from Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is, and I was not expecting that when I picked it up and I read it. It's better to avoid combat if you can. Sun Tzu, he understood that war is serious business. It's a last resort. It's extremely costly, both in terms of lives and treasure and political stability. But the problem is that we're trapped in these sinful human systems. We can't seem to get it right. I remember it was the historian. His first name was Alfred, I believe. Toynbee was his last name. He said one of the things we learn from history is that people don't learn very much from history. and I think he's right. That quote has really stuck with me. And which leads me, I'm praying for God's kingdom to come, because it's going to require divine intervention. It's going to, if we depend upon human beings to bring the kingdom about, well, we've failed. We can't do it. We've got, God has given us the gift of science. We can, cure diseases. We can do surgeries on people. And a lot of people have used that gift for good. On the other hand, it's also a double-edged sword. It's also increased our ability to kill one another. And so I'm praying for Jesus Christ to return and to establish God's rule, because we need some help. It's not, we can't do it through education. The human heart is too corrupt, and even those parts of us that are saved are still operating within systems that are not.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a fascinating addendum to the conversation, this conversation about anthropology. And so thank you again for your willingness to talk and to share your views.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chan. Thank you for this time, and I thank you for this project.